Hey everyone, I'm Joel Hubbard, and I'm an Enneagram coach here in Boston, and I am here with my good friend Jim Zartman.
And I get to be on the first of the panels.
Yeah.
These are a series of panel interviews we did with people of the certain type because, like we said on the intro, the Enneagram is not based on some external box we're trying to fit people into, but it's based on self-reporting, people telling their stories about what it's like to be in their skin. And so it was fun to be on this panel. It felt like one of the things that the eights really hate, which is vulnerability. It was very vulnerable to be on this and to tell these stories. Some of these stories I'd actually never told publicly. And you're always cringing a little bit, like if your family's going to hear it because they're part of these stories. But we just believe it's worth it because it's a beautiful thing to say, this is my voice. This is who I am. I'm going to own my voice, own my story, own my journey so that we can become more whole people.
Yeah. You know, I really loved doing this panel with you, Jim, and the other eights because I feel like eights sometimes get a bad rap. They're so powerful people. They tend to be sure of themselves, and they come at life with this gusto and this intensity. And so if you have a boss that's an eight, you might experience that man or woman as being controlling, as, telling you what to do and seemingly unaffected themselves. They just sort of just do it. And then they have so much energy. And so other people feel intimidated around them and don't oftentimes understand what is really happening underneath the skin of all that. And what we got to hear in this panel, which was so beautiful, was the transparency, the authenticity, the vulnerability, as you said, which was definitely there about what's going on behind the scenes of an eight.
Yeah, and you're right. We do get a bad rap a lot of times. I used to joke about how I made a great ninth impression. I used to always say that. I'm like, yeah, I make a great ninth impression because once you get to know me, like, oh, yes, there's a trust. But that initial thing, that initial experience of an eight, a lot of people go back on their heels a little bit because you're kind of intense. You're kind of over the top. The whole thing about experiencing conflict as intimacy. It's like a very foreign creature. And there's not like a ton of eights.
No, eights don't make up most of America like you'll hear us say later. Sixes do. And they oftentimes end up being pioneers. They start businesses. They, rise up to the tops of leadership. So you're not really working around and collaborating around a lot of eights. But you might have an eight in your family and wonder, why is this little person, this little child who's only 6 or 7 years old, telling me what to do? With certainty and with intent.
Very assertive thing from so early on. It's just there because we feel like we need it. And that's what you're going to hear more about. So at the beginning of this episode, Joel will give a more thorough description of the eight. And then you get to hear from me and my other two panelists about what it's like to be us. And hopefully you'll have more empathy and understanding and even love for
if that was possible.
A type that can often be a little off-putting to a lot of the world, but all in the name of goodness and justice, for better or worse. So, all right, enjoy the ride.
Tonight, we're looking at the eights. I'm so excited. Eights are the strong, willful, decisive, and eights are very confident people. Eights learned early on in life that the weak are the ones who get stepped on. Weak are the ones who get crushed. And it's not safe to just allow yourself to be and to allow the world to do what it wants to do. So eights amped up energy and decided it's better to go at life than to have life come at you. Eights are the kinds, sort of like the shepherd who goes out and is beating the grass with a stick to surface any snakes. You better do that because you don't know if there's a snake. So if you've ever been around an 8 and an 8 is kind of doing this to you, it's an effort at seeing if there's anything. Yeah, seeing if you're a snake. Yeah. Absolutely, right? So snakes could be there. You don't know, so you have to surface it, and that's how they engage their world. It's not an attempt. So the low side of the 8 is definitely an attempt at controlling people, no question. 8s want to control, but not all 8s do that. A lot of 8s don't want to be controlled. It's not about controlling other people. It's about sensing that the world is trying to control them, and so it's easier, it's safer to act out. And so 8s are very decisive, very quick. They sniff out BS very quickly. If there's something going on and you're not being straight with me, I'll call it out. They're very commonsensical. And so when you're dealing with an 8, you've got a lot of energy. You got a lot of power. The 8 discerned early on, it's better to go at life. And if you're going to go at life, go at it. You have to be strong. So they're the ones of all the other types that have the most raw life force and energy of all types, because they know how to tune into their body's energy and use it. They often push their body too far, and will end up sick, or will end up, completely without energy. But it's a short-lived, and then it's back at it. So 8s deny vulnerability and weakness, and pursue that which gives them a sense of intensity. Lust is what is called their vice, because it's a passion for intensity. It's a desire to experience life at its full. For an 8, if a glass of wine tastes good, then the whole bottle will taste good and is good for you. You just... no, 7s, it's like buffet. It's like, ooh, a little of this or a little of that. Ooh, 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 ooh. It's that. Whereas an 8 is like, damn, that's good. And it's like the whole thing. So life is consumed with intensity, which is all, again, it's part of the whole pathology of the 8 and its desire to protect itself from the possible dangers that are out there by attacking life rather than having a life attack the 8. So that's a general overview of the 8. The 8, when we used to say in the Enneagram world, we'd say, when a person is stressed, so we'll still use those words. In stress, an 8 goes to this. In a place of being relaxed, an 8 goes to that. I find it's much more true to the experiences that I talk with people, when I talk with people about this, in my own life too. When I'm stressed, I can go to the low side of my type. It's not that I'm going to go necessarily to the other one. But when my type has stopped working for me, that's when I find myself, or when I realize it's not going to work in this situation, then I'll ping to my number that I go to in stress. So as an 8, if an 8 keeps pushing and pushing and pushing and trying to get stuff done and it's not working, an 8 can end up going to 5. And that's when they become a little bit apprehensive. They become more apprehensive than they're used to. 8s are not apprehensive types. 8s are not, I don't know, maybe this, maybe that. They're not ambivalent. 8s, this is what we have to do. And if they don't know, it's just plain, I don't know. But when they say, I don't know, it's not I don't know. It's, I don't know, Because it comes at you. It's firm. They know what they know, and they don't know what they don't, and they say it. But when you see a 5 in the point of real distress or disintegration, okay, that's a good word for it, is the 8 starts to look like a 5. They start to pull back, become apprehensive, and they ascend to their head. They're a body type that knows how to move in action. Action first, and then the body intelligence guides them. And then they can rationalize it, and they can feel sometimes emotion, although that's very rare for 8s, but they'll have it. But it's action first that then gives them a sense. They have that knowing that if I'm in motion, I'm going to get it, and I'm going to get it right, and it's going to work. But when they start to become stressed, that's when they ascend to their head. They begin to analyze and overthink things, and that's when you see, you're really in a tough spot. It's because you're thinking way too much, and you're second guessing, and you don't have enough information, so you go dig more. When they're healthy, the 8s go to the 2. That's what I'm about to. I want to know specific examples. So that's what we're going to get to talking about. So when 8s are healthy, they start to get into, when they're doing their work and they're becoming healthy, they go to the 2. And that's when they become more interested in serving people. Because again, 8s can tend to be very, very boundaried people. They know where they are, where they begin, and where they end, right? It's a thing of, this is my boundary, this is who I am. But in health, they start to say, okay, yes, I want to serve not just my desires, my will, my appetites, but I want to serve other people. So what I want to hear from the 8s are I want to hear your stories. I want to hear how this shows up in your life. And talk to me about, does this relate? Is there language that you find is more helpful? Because I've given language, and again, every time we do this, no matter what book I've read, it tends to come much more from the type that's writing the description. So it's much better to hear from the actual type and the way you would put language to it. So if there's anything I've said that you feel like, that didn't quite get at it, or no, that hit it, but I would say it this way, I'd love to hear that.
Oh, I know where I begin, but I don't know where I end. Because I'm the tech guy. That was the only thing to start with. Okay, Alison.
Go, Jim.
That was all I wanted. The very first, what was the last thing he said? It was the whole thing about they know where they begin, they know where they end. And I was like, I don't know where I end. That's why I have no idea where I end. I'll just keep going. And then when I actually do run out of energy or get sick or shut down, I'm always surprised because I have absolutely no clue that I'm ever going to run out. If I ever run out of energy, I am legitimately surprised and baffled and angry at myself for not having more.
Actually, I wanted to speak to the point where you talked about in disintegration, that place where we go to analysis. For me, that shows up more when I have nothing to do. If I get bored in any way, or I don't feel fulfilled or purpose-driven, that's when it shows up. So I don't know if it's as much a stress as an 8, I have to keep on going. I have to have something to do. I have to have purpose. I have to have vision. I have to have goals. And if those things disappear, I'm up here wondering, what did I do wrong? I actually feel guilty for having nothing to do. And I begin to analyze, well, maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I said something wrong. Maybe I did something wrong. And that's where 5 will show up for me. And I step back and I actually begin to observe because I begin to doubt that I have anything to offer the world.
Something I wanted to add, and maybe this is a positive spin on the 8. I'm Natasha, by the way. Is that 8s are very aware of power dynamics. And so whenever I walk into a situation, the first thing I notice is who's in charge, who's not in charge, who's sucking up to the person in charge, who's not able to find their feet and needs help. I notice those things right away. And so we're not unaware of people, but we see them in kind of like, not that we're walking around ranking people, but we're aware of like, whoa, where's the power here? And I think when we get stressed and we go to the 5, then we stand back and we just look at all that. And when we're in a healthy place and a 2, I think this is the positive spin, is that we want those people who don't have power to be empowered and we want to help them. But sometimes the way we do that depends on, what's going on within us. But I think just on a positive note, the 8s really care about power and being empowered and empowering other people, which is why when we see the world as a, cruel and hard place, we just want to go at the world because I'm not going to be taken advantage of. But it's not just for me. It's also so I can protect the people I care about because I see that a lot of people can't do that for themselves. So.
Something she just said that I want to super highlight is there is a strong desire in the 8 to empower other people. That's super big deal to us. I think a lot of times people go back on their heels a little bit because they're just kind of like, that's a lot of intensity. But the whole thing is like, well, you can do it. You can do more. You can rise to the occasion. This is possible. Let's go. Like there's a lot of that behind everything we're saying, even if we're saying it as calm a way as possible. So I think stories are good. Somebody was asking me a little bit of the Enneagram, and I was saying I was an 8, and they're like, well, what's an 8? And I said, well, I was kicked out of a Christian school and fired from a mega church for a reason. The first one, the kicked out of a Christian school, it was just such this oppressive, depressing, awful environment that I totally disintegrated into 5, and I ceased all school activity. I never once did a piece of homework. I would show up on the tests, and that was about it. But I was so just disintegrated that I had completely shut down, and I couldn't move forward until I got out of there. Not only is this kind of environment, but because we can sniff the BS, because I'm super aware of every situation, I see the manipulation behind everything. I see the spiritual manipulation. I see the power at work where they're trying to manipulate me, trying to have power over people, trying to put us into boxes, and everything in me just resists no. So like the first one happened because I shut down in 5. The second one happened because I went to the unhealthy side of 8. Abuse and manipulation was starting to rise up. The old leader who wasn't that way has stepped out. A new leader had stepped in who, I won't go into that, but there was a lot of spiritual abuse and manipulation and you will do this or else kind of thing. And if you tell me you will do this or else, or I will either kill you or I will die trying. No joke. I will take you out. Or I will get buried in the process. And that's what happened.
Did you feel like, can you feel the energy? So you see the intensity. Go ahead.
So just to actually, talking about stories, I'm going to shove this up your nose. You can edit that part out.
No, that's good.
Just talking about stories. Shut up. Jim talks about...
See, this doesn't bother 8s at all. Like, this banter and this kind of intensity, it doesn't bother them. But for some of you, you might be like, ooh, that would hurt me. It doesn't. So relax. They're okay up here, really.
Jim was referring to, under certain circumstances, he went to a 5 when he was disintegrating. I was in a similar situation, and the spiritual abuse and control and manipulation was at me personally. And just to talk a little bit about, I went to a 9, which was my wing type. And I shut down in a way that I became, the ability to hold opinions of everybody just took off. And that thing where we want to reach out and help you, to the point that we will lose ourselves in it. And if you do it long enough and you ignore the manipulation and the spiritual abuse long enough, as an 8, you shut down, but you shut down in a way that you pour yourselves into somebody else and you lose yourself completely. So I look like a 9 when I am disintegrated. And I was a pastor for over 7 years. And having to see that manipulation and see that spiritual abuse and not be able to do anything about it. And I swung into my 9 wing, which was that peacemaker. I could mediate anything. I could look at any opinion and think everything was right and stood right back. And so the 8 can be still very effective, even when disintegrated, because we still focus on others. It's easier for me to focus on you than to now focus on myself. And so I poured myself into other people. And Joel, at one point in time, said, who are you? And I'm like, I don't know. I lose myself completely.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to say a little bit about the bodily responses, how we operate from our gut, is that often my gut gets there before the rest of me. So I can't explain this feeling, but it's so strong. It's so strong. Like it just does not feel right, or I feel sick to my stomach, or I get chills in the good way or the bad way. So sometimes when I walk in a place, I'm new to Boston. I've been here 18 months. And I realized that I've visited 12 churches in 18 months. And when you walk into a church, I don't know how other people react. Maybe you notice the lights, the people, how friendly they are, if you like the format of things. But when I walk in, it's my gut that tells me how I feel in that environment. And something can in my head be like, oh, this is not a perfect church, or this is not a perfect space. But my gut will be like, yeah, I'm about this place. And sometimes I can walk into a space and I'm like, everything like clicks the boxes, but I don't feel right in here. So I think it's hard sometimes for some eights to express what they know to be true for themselves, because logically they feel like, oh, I should feel this way or should feel that way. And, with environments where you see spiritual abuse or manipulation or just unhealthiness, sometimes you see it and you feel like, am I crazy? Because no one else sees this. And I can't explain it in a way that other people can accept. So I think one of the big things for me has been learning to trust my gut, but then learn how to communicate with other people so that I don't get in trouble. Because I haven't been like kicked out of places, but I've stepped down from ministry teams. I've stepped down from leadership. A lot of times when I go to a new church or a new fellowship, I'm asked to be in leadership, but then I start butting heads when I see things that I think are unjust. So I called out, in college, the ministry leader for just some things that I thought was kind of inappropriate with other young women in the fellowship. And I was 21, I think, and it just bothered me, and I was not fazed at all. And I said, that is not okay. And there were some other things that were happening, and I just said, I think I have to step down from ministry team because I just can't operate here. We find ourselves having leadership skills, but I've also found myself unable to operate in who I feel like I am because I butt heads with leadership sometimes. And then I disintegrate to a 5 where I'm like, I'm just not going to be involved at all. Yeah.
I was kind of wondering, my head immediately went, well, why did you step down as opposed to confronting it in a different,
So I grew up in a place where a lot of my friends looked like, Americans that you would expect from the movies. And I don't look that way. And so I think if I grew up in Asia, I would be a lot more bold and more of a typical 8 because I'd feel more at home. But growing up as an Asian American, I think I learned a lot of skills that 8s may not have. Like I learned a lot of 2 skills, how to be pleasant and kind and like the nice girl, But that has to do with observing power dynamics and seeing, okay, I see what people want and I need to align myself in a way that I'm not taken advantage of. And so it's kind of like soft power. So to answer your question, if I were a white male, I may have just said, hey, this is not okay. This is why I think it's not okay. And I have a right to say this. Yeah. But I didn't grow up that way, right? I grew up seeing my parents go to restaurants and have trouble communicating with people and being looked down on. I saw my brother get bullied. I stood up for him in the playground a lot against the older boys who bullied him. So I'm not afraid, but I think I just learned how to be smart. And so I think when I saw a situation that I was like, they're not going to listen, I was like, I'm not going to waste my time.
Really good answer.
And I think just to lean into that, if a white male walks in and they are an 8, they're strong and they're decisive and look at them. A female walks in and they're an 8 and you can fill in that blank. They're called names, especially in corporate America. So a woman learns really quickly that their 8-ness is not acceptable. And so you lean into that 2, you lean into that 9. And like Natasha said, you look at what works. As a pastor in a predominantly white church in white Maine, I did what was expected of me. And that is so counterintuitive to the 8. And the anger is there. and it's brewing, and I'm ready to delete the database and wipe out their communications and break the lighting because I was over all of that. And it's like, oh. But recognizing even the programming that can come from spiritual organizations, any kind of organization that says you should behave this way and lose your identity in that, and the brainwashing that can come. And I want to challenge you. Do you know who you are?
Wow, those are really good answers. I'm like, these are my people. It's kind of funny because I want to lean into actually what they were talking about as far as the eightness not being accepted, because I think almost all eights feel that way. You know, being a very body type, feeling that level of intensity. Abby said when we were dating that she had to redefine what she thought humility meant, because humility in the church means that you act insecure, and you act like you don't know what you're doing. And I'm not good at that. Because there's certain things I know what I'm doing, and other things where I don't know what I'm doing, I just say I don't know what I'm doing, and that's fine. Like I don't feel weird about that. But I think being a white male, like I could come in and I could say something, but having the gut response is not accepted. So I really leaned into the 7 wing, which is analytical, and I would give lots of reasons. I would lean into the headspace a lot. And I worked very hard on the capacity of being articulate and concise, especially as a songwriter and stuff like that. You learned how to boil language down to its simple and most potent capacity. Like that's what you're always going for, is how to boil that down. Because I always felt sort of out of place, like my body was going and my head was like back here, and then the heart was like 3 steps behind that. So there's all this, because what I feel like the 8 constantly hears, especially in the church world, is like, that person's arrogant. That's the perception of you. And I feel like they want us around when there's something wrong. When there's a mountain to climb, it's like, or there's an enemy to defeat, you send in the 8s. But as soon as that's over, get them out of there. Like, I always joke that 8s constantly hear their whole lives, be yourself, not that much.
Yeah, tone it down.
Seem to have struck a chord with the others here. I want to hear from you guys. Is that true? Do you feel that same way?
You know, I was thinking of Jacob from the Bible. I don't know what his Enneagram was, but there are times when I've related to him. He knows he's the second born, but he's like, oh, the firstborn's got a birthright. So I can relate to that because I didn't get to just, go ask for what I thought was, or what I wanted. I had to learn to be a little more subtle about it. Let's put some goat hair on my arm and do that thing. But you also see Jacob later on. He really has to learn to live under his father-in-law's authority. And I'm sure that was grueling, but I think that was God's way of teaching him some character traits that maybe if he was an 8, I'm just pretending, that he didn't have. And then you see him wrestling with God, right? He wrestles with God. And I think when I read that every time, I relate to that as, yeah, I know God is powerful, but I'm not one of those Christians who says, oh, Lord, what's your will? Or I don't know your will. It's like, no, I'm going to wrestle with you, God. I'm going to figure out what you're about, what I'm about, what you want me to be about, and what I want you to be about for me, right? Like, that's where I go spiritually.
Wow.
And I want to know, Lord, I will not let you go till you bless me, right? This is this blessing thing again, but he's being confrontational now. He's being his real 8. Like, I'm not sneaking around. I'm just asking for what I want. And God has to touch his hip socket and make him lame, but God gives him a new name. You're Israel. You're going to be the father of many generations. So I really relate with this thing of like, how does God be sovereign in my life? How do I respect that? But how do I also fight for what I think is my destiny, right? And this is right before he has to confront his brother Esau, who, there's that power struggle there. So I just think of how because we talk about what the church wants Christians to be, but if you actually read scripture, there are so many ways to be a follower of God and a friend of God, and you can be yourself, and God will contend with you in the ways he's made you, And I think as 8s, especially as women 8s, I can't speak for men, there's this need, there's this need to say, like, rise up and be empowered in the fullness of who you are, right? But then you have to learn how to be wise as serpents and gentle as doves. And that's a little harder for us sometimes. But I think the core of us is really pure, but we just, maybe if we rub you the wrong way, try to see kind of past that. That's my...
Okay, I got to stop you guys, because you guys are awesome. This is amazing stuff. But some questions that maybe that might be helpful for others who aren't eights, but maybe they live with an eight. Maybe they have an eight child. Maybe they have an eight boss. Maybe they have. So sometimes I love how you guys are so articulating it so well, but it's very helpful. I mean, I'm learning so much listening to you guys. But the whole thing of confrontation, I like how you see that as with God. There's the confrontation that takes place, and that's how you as an eight express and actually enter into relationship. I've heard it said by other eights, confrontation for us produces intimacy. But it pisses us off when someone does not rise up to that. When I am trying to get in, to know you, and I might be intense, but then everybody cowers, and that really bothers eights. So say something about that, because some of you here, as you're seeing the energy of an eight, you might be like, and talk about like what you're trying to do, because what's coming across may be coming across to people as, are you trying to control me? Are you trying to attack me? What are you trying to hurt me? And yet we heard you're the protectors. Eights are protectors. And so that's not what you're trying to do. So maybe speak to that, and then what you would like as a response from people as best as they can, and the way they're made, but that what you're looking for when you're doing that.
I think for me, personally, it's truth. I used to hate it when people said, God withdraws and he is silent so that you can discover yourself. It was like, no, because I'm asking God and he's not responding, and I'm asking God and he's not responding. And so for me, it's truth. I am coming at you and I want you to tell me what is really on your heart. What are you really thinking? What do you really want? And don't dance around the tulips to get there. I'm okay. Just be as direct as you can. It's true. And it's that thing you talked about finding the snakes and discovering the BS. We don't want it. I don't want all the layers. I don't want the icing. I don't want any of that. Tell me, and let's figure it out and move on. For me, it's about moving on. It's about figuring out the problem and moving on. I hate white elephants in the room. We pray for the white elephant, we bless the white elephant, and we save the white elephant, but nobody freaking kicks the white elephant out. It's like, can we talk about the white elephant? Yeah. There's a big, huge elephant in the room.
That's awesome.
Back to the wrestling picture, there's a certain intimacy when you're locked in a wrestling match with God or with someone else. You're fighting for power, who's going to end up on top, but you're like embraced, right? And so for me, one of the most relieving things actually is for somebody to call me out. When they do that, I'm like, they care enough to call me out. I respect you, I love you, and I feel loved by you. I don't mind a compliment if it's real, but I'd rather have somebody call me out than flatter me. And again, back to spirituality, doesn't it say in Proverbs, better to have a rebuke from a friend than flattery? I think there's a lot of spiritual richness to our personality that is somehow in church culture just never talked about or acknowledged. But I think it's redeeming for me to say, okay, I have my flaws as an 8. I do have issues with control sometimes, with power, whatever. But how can my Creator redeem the way that I was created to be a special kind of person, right? And to still thrive. So I think with the intimacy piece, it's I really love it when people will engage back at me. That's so thrilling. It's amazing. Yeah. But I've come to realize that for some people, it's really scary or really draining. It's really uncomfortable for other people. So I've had to learn to tone that down sometimes in order to serve other people. And I don't know if I should, and I think that's what I struggle with as an 8.
Cool.
Yeah, on the confrontation thing, Abby and I were just talking on the way over, that there's this way that sometimes that if you bring something to me, like confront me, my initial reaction to that is often a shutdown or a comeback, or it's a rise up thing. And then 2 days later, I'm like, yeah, totally, you're right. Because, I have to think about it. I have to process it. But there's this defensiveness that can sometimes be the immediate reaction. And with most people that are around me who don't live with me, like, I don't give the reaction right away, even if I feel it, but it's a totally different thing. But there is something about actually enjoying the pushback. So, just in staff meeting this week, I said something, I went this thing and I said this brilliant thing. And
of course. Always.
Because that's how I think of everything I say. And I'm an 8, so I state all my opinions as if they were facts. And immediately, because Nancy has learned how to respond to that, she goes, no, it's wrong for this and this and this reasons, and you actually need to do this. And my immediate reaction was like, yeah, her thing. Ignore everything I just said. Yeah, and it takes a lot, for her to do that. And then for me, I'm just like I know a lot of people will be like, oh man, she shut down my idea. I'm like, nope, her thing's better. Ignore what I just said. And that's nothing to me. But the 8 does well when they lean into the vulnerability. I can say it's one of the hardest things in my life has been the unwillingness of leaders around me to actually do that. That has been so hard. And I've been able to deal with some of this stuff internally since I've come here that I've never dealt with in my life. Because literally Joel's the first leader I've ever served under who wasn't threatened by me. I always could feel that I would walk into a meeting with a boss and they're kind of pulling back a little bit. And I didn't understand why. I hadn't dealt with some of my stuff, so I didn't realize that. Or they would kind of overdo it. I had one boss, he would just kind of rah. And at the church I was at. And I remember just taking a very big body position in the chair and just kind of curiously looking back at him and being like, that's interesting. Well, I don't really think you're seeing that clearly and I would go totally analytical and express it and just be like, I had to react because if I came back with the same level of force, I know I'm just going to sever the relationship. Because the thing that the 8s feel a lot of times about other people's anger is it seems sloppy to us. Everyone else's anger is just kind of it's explosion. It's like this vomit. It's so emotional. And it's just kind of well, you needed a scalpel. Why'd you come in with a cannon? That seems kind of overkill,
That's so true. Yes, when I first heard that, I just thought that was so right on of the 8s I know. It's precise. Boom. You hit your anger issue. Whatever angers you, you hit it, but it's precise. Whereas whenever I got mad, Patty's like, yeah, you are messy. You're it's all over the place. It's not, you're dealing with a million different things. Whereas 8s are current with their anger, which is a lesson to other people. So there's, again, what you're learning too with a lot of these different types, as you learn over the weeks, there are things that are really powerful gifts within the type. They can, 8s really keep the anger as very current. There's no,
There's no repression.
There's no repression. There's not this whole, a bunch of it. But again, there's something that you guys have also talked about in terms of having to really work against the anger because being female, non-white.
I think a lot of it is because we're so disassociated from our emotions, right? So the anger, it's clean, it's factual. Even if you're coming at us with a criticism, we don't hear it through the frame of emotion. It's a fact. This is how you see me, and okay, you're wrong, but that's okay, But repression
of anger.
Thank you.
Yes.
Learning when your job is at risk, if you show that anger, or relationship is at risk if you show that anger, or pastors don't get angry. There's no humanity in being a pastor. So you're this calm, collected, they're coming at you. I'm Black, I'm female, and I'm gay. I have 3 things that will marginalize me in any environment. And you want me to be angry as well? I'm done. And so almost coming in a submissive stance. Yeah. Yes, massa? And it's really, and it frustrates because you're doing it. And in here, you're dying on the inside. Wow. And it's this weird space where the world has told you you are too much for them. Mm-hmm. You want, like you said, you want your light to shine, but just not so bright so that it overshadows us. Wow. And so 8, I think the flip side of being an 8 is that thing where if you hear the message too much, you repress the very thing that you are. And so in repressing anger, you also repress the opinions, the things you bring to the table. You begin to question everything, and even that thing we talk about with the need for power and control in our relationship with God, having read on it, it talks about 8s have to consent to stillness. And we have to give permission, not just to God, but to ourselves to stop and give God permission to love us, and then give myself permission to feel it. And that God is not intimidated by my anger. God is not intimidated by my intensity. But because the world has told me he is, I even can approach God in a repressed way and say,
wow.
And yet God is saying, lift up your head.
Wow.
And it's this weird space. And so when we talk about confrontation, you come in close to God and you're fighting him. It's the closest an 8 ever feels to you. Wow. Is that place where you're here and you give a damn about me, that you're going to fight with me, that you are going to confront me, and that you're not going to back up, but you care and love me enough to say, I am here and I don't care, but I am here always.
Wow. So good. Wow. Yeah, there we go. Mic drop. Talk about emotion. You started there.
You can go because I have none.
It's really important because out of the triads, 8s, or the body types, as well as head types, have a hard time accessing the emotional center. So I'd like to hear about that. How do you process emotion?
Yeah, when I was little, I didn't cry very much because I was the strong one. My mother cried a lot, and I grew to see that as a sign of weakness. My younger brother cried a lot, probably normally, but to me it was a lot, and I learned to see that as a sign of weakness. So I was very proud of myself for always being able to hold it in and not cry. I also tend to, when I start to feel myself feeling sad, I just go straight to anger and I get mad because I would rather be mad than feel sad. I actually feel alive when I'm angry. I know that sounds really warped maybe to some people, but when you're a fighter, you don't want to sit around and feel sorry for yourself. And I'm not saying that's what it is. That's my perception of what it is. I think the normal emotion of like, I'm sad. Why do I feel sad? And to acknowledge that is really scary for me. And it's ironic because when I was little, I wasn't scared of bullies. I wasn't scared of the dark. I wasn't really scared of anything except feeling weak in my own self. That's the scariest thing for me.
Okay.
So I think, the emotional vulnerability piece is where, personally, I think that's hard for me. Except for the anger, that's the emotion that I just want to go to.
Okay.
I think as I was growing up, I heard that wonderful saying, girls should be seen and not heard. And so I learned from a really early age that my opinion and my emotion didn't matter. And there was a Christmas, I was around 9, and I had shared with my mom, I was sitting at a Christmas tree, and I had shared with my mom that I was sexually abused when I was younger. And she said it was your fault, my fault. And that was one of those things that said, you don't matter. Your emotion doesn't matter. Feelings and expression don't matter because it doesn't get you anywhere in this world. The only thing that matters is strength and you showing them that nothing is going to faze you. So I learned at a really young age to deny how I feel. I don't even go there. Emotion, it doesn't even show up. I have to work hard. I would literally have to sit even now and say, how do you feel about this? And I have to strip away the hurt. I have to strip away the anger. I have to strip away the fact, the rationalizing of it and go, no, this is how I really feel. Even if it doesn't make sense, this is how I really feel. And it can take me a couple of days to really figure out how I really feel because I've been taught for so long that feelings won't make a difference.
Oh, this is neat because it's neat to hear this because I think a lot of times as an 8, I feel like there aren't any others. There's just not a lot of 8s and if they are, they're probably not going to reveal themselves, especially in the church.
Wow.
But so on the emotion thing, I've actually trying to lean into this one because I feel like I've been pretty in touch with my emotions most of my life because, or at least certain ones, like I could go into sadness and feel fine with that because the artist side, like I loved writing these horribly depressing songs and and I actually started realizing where some of this came from just this year. They talk about how 8s often experienced some kind of an early loss of innocence in some way or another. And I remember thinking, well, I relate to the 8 in a lot of ways, but not that. Like, I don't really relate to that because for a lot of us, and I've talked to other 8s and I've talked to other spouses of 8s, because a lot of times we just go, well, that stuff formed us. It made us who we are. It made us strong. So it's fine. Yeah. I literally, I remember certain memories thinking they were innocuous as a kid. And until I started reading about some of this stuff and then waking up at like 2 a.m. with flashbacks and dreams for me, it was kindergarten. And it was both this vulnerability and strength kind of came up as options to me, is what I felt like. And it was like, well, this is an obvious choice, especially, being a young male. You don't cry, you're strong. That was communicated on top of what I already had a leaning towards. So in kindergarten, my parents were separated, and so I started kindergarten a year later. So I was the oldest kid in the class, and I was built like my daughter Vera, who's very muscular. So just from a physical standpoint, I didn't realize it, but I was like a lot more physically imposing than any of the other kindergarten boys. And I think it was hard because at this point in time, I felt kind of vulnerable and exposed because we were, living in my house and I was in kindergarten and I had to actually get up, get myself ready, walk several blocks to another kid's house and wait for a bus and take that bus in. And it was just like very self-sufficient for a kindergartner. And I remember thinking, like, looking through my tears and after school one day and just being like, I just cannot take the bus today, please. And because I didn't know if my parents' car pulled up, then I had to ride home. And if it didn't, I just had to do my whole process in reverse and basically fend for myself. And no one was there when I would even get home. So I was like latchkey kid in kindergarten. So it was, you got to do this. And so I remember one day just staring through my tears out the window, just praying, like, I just can't do it today. Just please someone come and pick me up, and seeing my dad's van pull up and just being like, oh, okay, I don't have to be that strong today.
Wow.
And at the same time, who knows, that same week, a couple of days later, one of the boys was picking on the girl I liked. And I decided I was going to protect her because that's the protector thing, right? And be strong. And so I started kind of fighting with him, and then all the other boys joined in, so I'm fighting all the boys. And Abby asked me, she's like, were you wrestling to the ground? I was like, no, I was literally grabbing boys by the coat and just flinging them left and right, just throwing bodies. And it was just kind of I saw myself as this kid staring through his tears waiting for a van, and this kid throwing all the other boys and going, I think I know what I want to be.
Wow.
If I'm going to be safe in this world, I know which one to choose.
Wow. That's huge. Wow. Let's take a breather. This is heavy stuff. Just want to say thank you to you guys. I mean, being as vulnerable as you were up here, that is not something that's comfortable and easy for 8s to do.
I know, right?
So that's huge. Thank you. What we're doing here is a lot of self-awareness stuff and not transformational work. All right. So that's where I just want you guys to be aware of that. I'm eager to dive into that part because that's the stuff I love to do, and exploring the journey and the path that each one of us has to walk, and we each have a different one. But I just want to say thank you, and also maybe take some questions. Any questions before we transition to the 9 panel?
Is there something that we can do to help you feel comfortable or able to be yourself better?
I think the church needs to do a better job of leaning into vulnerability and transparency. You know, we love to say the cross is enough, the blood of Jesus has covered it, and we put all this stuff at the foot of the cross, and we never deal with our shit, and so therefore we don't have the capacity to deal with anybody else's. And if the church can do a better job of recognizing we all start at the same place, we're all human, life sucks, and give everybody permission to just be who they are, who God created them to be. I'm dealing with my stuff, you're dealing with my stuff. And if we can just have some humility, I think the church is wrapped up in ego and this pretense that we're okay, God is good all the time God is good. And we want to say this and we want to believe this, and therefore we don't give permission for people to really say what they feel, what they're struggling with, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses. I think the church across the board needs to be more vulnerable and more humble.
And going along with that, I think if the church can be a place where conflict is modeled in healthy ways and where people can practice being in relationship with one another, but also exploring how to do conflict, a lot of what happens is someone gets hurt at church. They leave the church. It's never talked about again. Those who choose to stay. And they're the ones who won the power struggle. And history is written by those in power, right? And if the church can be more conscious about that, then I think people who might have more power can be a little more aware of empowering people and giving them their power. Because not anyone who's not an 8 will still need to be empowered and care about power. Maybe they don't express it the way we do. But I think the healthy conflict piece is important because I think church is one of the places that actually is the worst at modeling conflict.
Yeah, for sure.
When you fire somebody at work, when somebody leaves work, there's an exit interview. There's an HR person. At work, at church, who knows how this pastor left, how this person left? There's no closure a lot of times. It just seems rare that conflict is seen as a healthy thing. And I think also if pastors could teach on healthy conflict in Scripture, Jesus was all about that. He called Peter out. Peter was one of his closest disciples. Peter was the rock on which the church was built, and Jesus gave him conflict, right? The gospel is about conflict too. He called out the Pharisees, but why did he do that? He did it because he cared. He did it out of love. So I think if the church can model conflict that's not out of fear, but rather out of love, I think that helps 8s to learn how to engage people rather than lashing out and offending people and scaring them or just leaving.
Yeah.
And it helps other people learn how to engage with 8s too, because we are the body of Christ and we need you guys to teach us stuff, right? But if you don't engage with us, we will never learn some things. There are some things I can only learn from some people who aren't 8s, right? And so I think to not be intimidated, but to say, I love that sister, I love that brother enough to kind of fearfully go and say, like, I'm going to engage with you, even though you're a scary 8.
Yeah, I mean, it's just don't pull away.
Mm.
That's it. That's it. We don't have an expectation of agreement. We just have an expectation of relationship. So if you don't pull away, we're good.
Awesome. That's really good.
Well, hey, thank you so much for listening to me and my other 2 panelists as we got vulnerable here on the Enneagram Panels podcast. If you want to hear more from Joel about his coaching and find out more about that, you can go to www.joelhubbard.com. The Enneagram Panels podcast is brought to you by Talkie Records Studio in Lynn, Massachusetts, and Vine 39 Church in Stoneham, Massachusetts. Next episode will feature the Enneagram Type 9. Have a good one.